It was already too late when he realized the mistake. Or at least, that's what I let him believe. Standing by my desk with the kind of stillness that comes only from true, cold rage boiling beneath your skin. His face had drained to a ghastly shade of white, the email still open on his phone, the tiny CCHR line glaring at him like a noose tightening around his neck. Around us, the office buzzed obliviously, keys clicking, phones ringing, laughter rolling out of the break room like poison smoke. And I watched him fumble, helpless and frantic, trying to figure out if there was still a way to breathe after the trap had already sprung. The day had been normal, almost boring, until the intern walked by his glass office door wearing a blouse too thin for her own good, carrying a stack of files she could barely balance, and his eyes latched onto her like a leech. I saw it happen, the way he shifted forward in his leather chair, the way his jaw tightened like he was chewing down something he didn't have the strength to swallow. And maybe if it had been the first time, if this was just an ugly impulse, I could have ignored it like the 100 other dirty little things this company swept under its blood-stained carpets. But it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first intern. And this time, it was going to burn. I knew about the emails because he was arrogant enough to leave his laptop open during meetings, trusting that nobody would be bold enough to look over his shoulder, trusting that his charm and his title would protect him like they always had. He flirted with her shamelessly, brazenly, slipping jokes and winks into lines about training sessions and late nights, writing with the clumsy bravado of a man who believed the world was too scared or too stupid to catch him. She flirted back too, of course, eager and green and believing that she was special, that she wasn't just another disposable amusement waiting to be chewed up and spat out when the next shiny toy walked in. I spent a week gathering them, every nauseating thread, every sick little joke, every line that crossed a line and then another, and another. I built a private folder called Insurance, but I wasn't insuring myself. I wasn't scared of him. I wanted him to drown. When I finally moved, when I finally set the whole thing in motion, it was almost embarrassingly easy. One reply, one click, one extra recipient added to the chain that was already slithering along between him and the intern, like a whispered confession. "Let's discuss it tonight after the team leaves," he wrote, the winking emoji flashing on the screen like a bullet. I typed back, fingers steady, heart hammering in triumph. "Sure, I'll make sure the door is locked. For privacy." Then I attached the latest report he was waiting on. Attached a few other innocuous documents to make it look like I wasn't paying attention, and CC'd HR so casually, so naturally, it looked like a slip of the hand. It wasn't a slip. It was a spear aimed straight through the soft, bloated heart of his career. When he burst out of his office, the floor seemed to shudder under the violence of his footsteps, papers scattering behind him like wounded birds. He made it halfway to my desk before realizing he couldn't yell, couldn't make a scene without slicing his own throat even deeper. His hand hovered in the air like he might still dare to grab me, to snatch the email right out of my inbox, to somehow unsend the message now spiraling through the company's veins like a venom that no apology could cure. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, some strangled noise stuck in his throat. I looked up at him and smiled. The smile was cold enough to crack concrete. "Is there a problem?" I asked, sweetly enough that it sounded like a blade being drawn out of a sheath. He couldn't answer, his hands clenched and unclenched uselessly at his sides, like he was wrestling with the sudden, horrifying understanding that no one was coming to save him this time. Not the director he played golf with, not the VP he'd charmed with his whiskey-soaked stories. Not even the HR rep who used to turn a blind eye to the messes he left behind in exchange for promotions and bonuses. This wasn't some whisper in the break room. This wasn't something he could hush with a wink and a bottle of expensive wine. The evidence was already loose inside the building's bloodstream, multiplying, mutating, growing teeth. And I was untouchable. He tried to say my name, tried to summon some memory of a favor done, a kindness given, some shred of leverage he could pull to stop the bleeding. But I gave him nothing. I sat there, blinking up at him like he was a speck of dust, irrelevant, and already forgotten. Around us, the office was still roaring along in its mindless rhythm. People answering phones, printing reports, sucking down coffee, and the delicious cruelty of it all was that no one even noticed he was already drowning. They would soon. The first email from HR came 20 minutes later, marked with a little red flag and a subject line that must have tasted like ash in his mouth. Request for immediate clarification regarding workplace conduct. I watched from the corner of my eye as he flinched when the notification popped up, his trembling hand almost knocking over his mug as he yanked his laptop closer, reading, rereading, searching for some loophole, some ambiguity he could slip through. There wasn't one. I had made sure of that. The intern, poor thing, was still oblivious, sitting 2 rows away, twirling a pen between her fingers and giggling at something on her screen. Maybe thinking about the private meeting scheduled for that evening. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But pity was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Not when the place reeked of the carcasses of girls like her. Promises broken, reputations ruined, all so he could feel powerful for 5 minutes before discarding them like gum spat into a gutter. He stormed back into his office, slamming the door hard enough that the glass vibrated in its frame, drawing a few startled looks from the interns and junior staff. His anger was a living thing now, thick and greasy, seeping out from under the door like smoke from a house already half engulfed in flames. I leaned back in my chair, letting it wash over me, letting it feed the beast that had been sharpening its claws inside my ribs for months. Another email hit his inbox seconds later. This one wasn't polite. It was a demand. A meeting. 30 minutes. HR conference room, 3rd floor, glass walls where everyone could see you walk in and walk out. Branded for all time as one of the damned. I imagined him upstairs, sweat pooling, at the back of his tailored shirt, breathing like a man trying to suck air through a straw, pacing in the corner of that sterile little room while the HR director and the company's legal officer laid out his sins like a surgeon displaying tumors, torn out from a body that was already rotting. I wondered if he tried to lie. I wondered if he dared to say it was all a misunderstanding, a joke, just harmless flirting between consenting adults. I wondered if his voice cracked when he realized there were screenshots, printouts, receipts. Downstairs, I pulled open my bottom drawer and calmly pulled out my lunch, eating it one slow bite at a time while chaos howled invisibly through the corridors above me. By the time he came back down, his suit looked like it had shrunk 2 sizes, and his face gleamed with a sick, grayish sweat. His eyes met mine across the sea of monitors and heads, desperate, pleading, begging me to be the person he could still manipulate, still bribe, still terrify into silence. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to know. He staggered into his office again, locking the door this time, not that it would save him. A few minutes later, the intern got called upstairs too, summoned by a polite but firm email, with a subject line that must have seemed harmless at first. She went, clutching her notebook, her steps quick and eager, probably thinking this was it. The beginning of her rise, the proof she was special. When she returned, her face was a mask of horror. She didn't cry, not yet, but her mouth trembled, and her hands shook, and she couldn't look anyone in the eye as she packed her things, stuffing notebooks and chargers and a half-eaten granola bar into her tote bag with frantic, fumbling fingers. Nobody asked her what happened. They didn't have to. Offices like ours were built on silence, on looking away, on pretending you hadn't heard the screaming until the blood dried and the carpet was cleaned and another intern took her place. When she left, she didn't even say goodbye. I watched her slip through the glass doors like a ghost already forgotten. And then it was his turn. The final email hit his inbox an hour later. Immediate termination, formal notice. No meeting this time, no handshakes, no carefully worded severance package to help him slip away clean. They were cutting him loose like a rotted limb, and the wound they left behind would fester until everyone who had ever admired him, envied him, wanted to be him, realized just how deep the rot had gone. He didn't even pack up his office. Security did that. 2 grim-faced guards arrived with cardboard boxes and tight, neutral expressions, boxing up his framed photos, his awards, the stupid little desk toys he thought made him look approachable. They didn't speak to him. They didn't look at him. They just scooped up his life like it was trash to be hauled away before it started to stink up the place. I thought he might fight it, thought he might rage, throw things, scream, make one last desperate grab for dignity. He didn't. He left like a man walking to his own funeral, his back hunched, his hands limp at his sides, his expensive shoes scuffing the carpet with every step, and I sat there, eating the last bite of my sandwich, smiling so wide it almost hurt. It wasn't enough. Watching him leave, broken and bleeding inside, should have been enough, but it wasn't. His stain was still all over this place, soaked deep into the walls, the furniture, the people. I could feel it, oozing out of every congratulatory plaque he had ever mounted on the lobby walls, every fake smile that still clung to the lips of the executives upstairs, pretending they didn't know, pretending they had been shocked and appalled when the news broke, pretending their hands weren't just as dirty as his. The rumors started immediately, of course. The whispers snaked through the cubicles like rats in a sinking ship, carrying half-truths and wild exaggerations, sharpening every detail into a weapon. Some said he was caught stealing. Some said it was harassment. A few dared to say the word, rape, their voices dropping to scandalized murmurs, their eyes flicking nervously toward HR like children who knew they were dancing too close to something that could burn them alive. Nobody said my name. Not yet. But they would. I walked past his office, stripped bare now, only a dark rectangle on the carpet where his desk had been, a faint shadow on the wall where his diplomas used to hang. It smelled like dust and loss and cowardice, and I breathed it, in deep, savoring it like victory. Upstairs, the conference rooms were full of emergency meetings, legal consultations, damage control. I caught sight of the HR director through a gap in the blinds, her face pinched tight with panic, her hands fluttering uselessly as she spoke into a speakerphone, probably with corporate's crisis management team. I knew how this game was played. I knew they were less worried about what he had done, and more worried about what might still come crawling out of the dark now that someone had dared to turn on the lights. I wasn't finished. There were more emails, more secrets. I had spent months collecting them, stitching them together into a web so tight and sticky that anyone who touched it would find themselves entangled, unable to cut free without tearing their own flesh. Names, dates, deals made, in back rooms and corner offices, promotions traded for silence, complaints buried until they rotted. I had a file ready to go, already drafted and loaded into a private account, ready to be sent to every major journalist in the city with one push of a button. I had backups stashed in cloud drives under fake names, hard copies hidden in places no one would think to look. I hadn't done all this to bring down one man. I had come for the whole rotten machine. When my manager, his loyal little disciple, came slithering over trying to check in with me, his voice oily with fake concern, I almost laughed in his face. He fumbled through some nonsense about how difficult transitions could be, how we're all processing this, and we need to stick together right now. And I nodded along, smiling sweetly, pretending I was just another scared little cog in their dying machine. He didn't know. None of them did. But they would. The first media request hit the company's inbox 2 days later. Some junior assistant flagged it as spam, not understanding the bloodstorm that was already gathering over their heads. By the time the second and third came in, actual journalists, big names with cold, sharp questions and deadlines that didn't care about corporate spin, the executive team was already assembling like terrified rats on a sinking ship. They released a statement, of course, a carefully worded piece of fiction full of shock and zero tolerance, and "we are conducting a thorough internal investigation" bullshit, hoping it would be enough to smother the fire before it spread. It wasn't. The article dropped on a Thursday morning just before lunch, and it hit like a bomb. They had printed everything, every sordid email, every silenced complaint, every confidential settlement tucked quietly away over the last 5 years. They named names. They drew lines. They quoted sources who, emboldened by the sudden exposure, had finally decided they had nothing left to lose by speaking out. The company's name trended on Twitter within the hour. Not for innovation, not for growth, for scandal, for rot, for shame. I sat at my desk and watched it happen in real time. The stock price plunging, the board members issuing frantic denials, the sudden announcement of leadership changes to try to cauterize the wound before it bled out completely. They fired 3 VPs that afternoon. 2 more resigned before sunset, fleeing like rats who knew the ship was going down no matter how fast they bailed. HR sent out a panicked email about confidentiality agreements and respect for ongoing investigations. But nobody was listening anymore. The fear was a living thing now, bigger and hungrier than me, and it had broken loose. They still didn't know who had pulled the trigger. They suspected, of course. They weren't stupid, but they couldn't prove it. I had covered my tracks too well. I had learned from the best, watching him for years, learning how power moved, how it cloaked itself in smiles and empty promises and plausible deniability. I had built my revenge like he had built his empire, carefully, ruthlessly, invisibly. And now I was the one smiling while they burned. It wasn't just the company anymore. The poison spread outward, rippling through LinkedIn posts, anonymous forums, insider tip lines. Past interns started talking. Ex-employees crawled out of their graves, telling their stories with shaking voices, and screenshots to back them up. Old lawsuits resurfaced, dusty court documents dragged back into the light like corpses exhumed for autopsy. The city's business journal ran a full exposé with a headline so vicious it could have doubled as an epitaph. No one who had touched him could scrub the stain off their hands now. At first they tried to pretend it was an isolated incident, that they were victims too, shocked and horrified, just as betrayed as the rest of us. But the emails, the settlements, the resignations stacking up one after another like bodies in a plague house, they told a different story, one too loud and ugly to ignore. The CEO stepped down within a week, citing personal reasons, with a smile that looked more like a grimace. The CFO vanished 2 days later, fleeing to Europe under the guise of an extended family leave, though anyone with half a brain knew he was running from subpoenas that were already being whispered about. In the corners of downtown law offices, department heads fell like dominoes, each one trying to shield themselves behind the next, hoping the fire would stop just short of their own door. It didn't. Inside the building, the survivors moved like ghosts, jumping at every sudden noise, flinching from every unexpected meeting request. The bright, bustling office that once buzzed with forced laughter and desperate ambition now felt hollow, gutted, a haunted carcass still twitching with the memory of life. And I walked through it untouched, unseen, a phantom wrapped in satisfaction, sharper than any knife. I could have stopped there. I could have let it die naturally, let the collapse complete itself while I quietly stepped away, clean and victorious. I could have collected my severance, smiled for the meaningless restructuring meetings, and slipped into a new job somewhere else with my resume polished and my hands ostensibly clean. But I didn't want clean. I wanted blood, so I drafted one. Last email, short and simple. attaching a final set of documents I had saved for the right moment. Proof of illegal dealings, accounting fraud, bribes funneled through fake consulting firms, things so explosive that no amount of PR spin could bury them. I sent it to the authorities, federal, state, city, a separate copy to a dogged little non-profit watchdog group known for chewing corporate criminals into shreds and spitting out what was left in courtrooms and headline news articles. I sent it anonymously, of course. The account wiped itself 10 minutes later, vanishing into the ether like a ghost, laughing as it disappeared into the fog. By the end of that month, the company didn't exist anymore. Not really. They changed the name, desperate to escape the ruin. They sold off assets, laid off hundreds, blamed the economy, blamed changing market conditions, blamed everything except their own greedy, rotting souls. But it didn't matter. Everyone knew. Everyone would always know. Their new name was just a tombstone. And me? I left on my own terms, my resignation letter a masterpiece of neutral professionalism, free of emotion, free of evidence, just another quietly spinning cog slipping out of the machine. No one suspected, no one questioned. They were too busy trying to survive the disaster I had unleashed. I started somewhere new, somewhere clean, somewhere no one knew my face or my name or the things I had done. And sometimes, late at night, I thought about the look on his face, the moment he realized he was doomed, the moment the weight of all his sins came crashing down and there was no one left to save him. I thought about how it tasted in my mouth, not sweet, not bitter, something deeper, heavier, richer, something like justice. And I slept like a baby every single night.